London, 1831. A pale winter dawn crept over the city's rooftops, softening the chimneys into silhouettes and tinting the sky with the faintest rose. In that muted light, the truth of society often revealed itself, not in grand gestures or public proclamations, but in whispers, in tightened glances, in the cold precision with which a life could be unmade. And it was in this hour, before the world fully woke, that Lady Eron of Ashcombe sat upon the edge of her borrowed bed, hands folded tightly in her lap, listening to the muffled stirrings of a household that had already decided her fate. She was no Londoner by birth, and yet the city had shaped her. Years spent in quiet study under the guidance of a widowed aunt had filled her with books, languages, and thoughts considered unfit for most young ladies. She carried herself with a gentleness that was not weakness but restraint, for Eron had long understood how a woman without land, fortune, or powerful relations must tread softly through the world. Still, she had not imagined that matrimony, something so profoundly sacred, could unravel with such swift cruelty. 7 days. 7 days since she had become the Duchess of Ashcombe, wife to a man she had known only briefly yet trusted instinctively. 7 days since she had stepped into the echoing halls of his ancestral home with a trembling hope that she might carve a place within it. But hope, she now understood, could be shattered quietly. Voices carried through the thin door. The Dowager Duchess spoke first, her tone clipped, each syllable delineated with a kind of practiced disdain. "It is for the best. The impropriety of this match endangers us all. She will depart before sunrise." Another voice, one of the Duke's brothers, responded with something harsher, though the words blurred together in Eron's mind, becoming nothing more than an indistinct wave of disapproval. She pressed her hands against her ears, but it did nothing to quiet the memory of the Dowager's verdict from the previous evening. "You are not suited for this family," the Dowager had said as firelight cast sharp shadows across her stern features. His Grace acted out of youthful rebellion and sentimentality. "The marriage will be corrected. You will be escorted from the estate before first light. It is a mercy, considering the scandal you might otherwise provoke." Eron remembered bowing her head, not out of agreement but because she lacked the strength to meet anyone's gaze. In that moment, the world had felt small, as if the manor itself were shrinking around her, pressing her into insignificance. Not once had the Duke been mentioned. Not his feelings, not his intentions, not his rights. It was as though he were an afterthought, as though his absence granted the family free rein to rewrite the nature of the marriage entirely. She rose and moved to the small travel trunk at the foot of the bed. It looked pitifully modest compared to the gilded chests the other ladies of the aristocracy carried. The few gowns she owned had been neatly folded hours before, her fingers trembling as she arranged each one. A narrow volume of collected poetry lay beside them. It had been a gift from her aunt and was the one object she could not bear to leave behind. Gently, she slid it beneath the gowns. Outside, a soft knock sounded, too hesitant to belong to a servant accustomed to authority. Eron opened the door to find a young maid, her eyes downcast, her breath forming small clouds in the chilled air of the hallway. "My lady," the girl whispered, "they say the carriage will be ready shortly." She paused, then added more softly, "I am sorry." The words pierced deeper than any formal condemnation. "Thank you," Eron replied, summoning a faint, polite smile. It wavered but held, much like her composure. She closed the door again, leaning against it for a moment as she gathered herself. She had not wept, not when the Dowager delivered the decree, not while packing, not even through the long hours of the night. Tears, she decided, were a luxury for women with protection, with allies, with certainty. She had none. She had only herself and the hollow ache of 7 days spent in a home where she had never been welcomed. Her thoughts drifted to the Duke, not as a titled figure but as the man she had glimpsed in those rare, unguarded moments. His gentleness had surprised her. He had spoken with a soft earnestness, had listened with genuine interest when she spoke of poetry or history, had seemed almost relieved to find a companion who did not treat him as an emblem of power. There had been something in his eyes, a quiet longing she had not understood then. And now, with the cold weight of dismissal pressing down on her, she wondered if she had misread him entirely. Perhaps he had regretted the marriage. Perhaps he had found himself unable to defend her. Perhaps the family's contempt echoed his own. The thought was a slow, twisting knife. When dawn broke fully, a faint golden wash filtered through the frost-kissed window. Eron lifted her trunk and stepped into the corridor. Her slippers made almost no sound against the polished wooden floors as she walked the long hallway toward the grand staircase. Portraits of stern-faced ancestors watched her departure. Their painted eyes seemed to judge her as unworthy of joining their ranks. At the foot of the stairs, Mrs. Havisham, the housekeeper, waited with an expression too carefully composed to be anything but sympathetic concealment. She bowed her head slightly. "My lady, the carriage stands ready." "Thank you, Mrs. Havisham," Eron said softly. She hesitated before adding, "You have been very kind." The housekeeper glanced about and, realizing no one else lingered within earshot, lowered her voice. "It was not His Grace who ordered this." Eron's breath caught. Does he know?" Mrs. Havisham shook her head. "He was called to London. The family acted swiftly in his absence." A tremor ran through Eron's fingers, but she concealed it by adjusting her gloves. "I see." The information offered a flicker of warmth, no more than the heat of a match, but she tamped it down. Even if he had been unaware, he had still left her with a family ready to unravel her existence the moment his back was turned. Whatever affection she believed might have existed between them could not overcome such stark, undeniable truth. She followed Mrs. Havisham through the front doors, where the winter air embraced her with a sharp, bracing chill. A plain black carriage stood waiting in the courtyard, its wheels lightly frosted, the horses stamping impatiently. The driver avoided her gaze. As she approached the carriage, she sensed movement behind her. The stable boy hurried toward her, cheeks flushed from the cold. In his hand he held a small envelope, sealed with red wax. "My lady," he said breathlessly, "this was found in the steward's office. It bears His Grace's crest. I thought perhaps it was meant for you." Eron accepted it with a hand that suddenly felt unsteady. The seal was unmistakably the Duke's. Yet she hesitated to break it, afraid of what comfort it might offer, or what disappointment. "Thank you," she said quietly. The boy bowed and retreated. Eron paused at the carriage door, the envelope weighing more than its slight mass should allow. For a moment, she stood suspended between leaving and lingering, between abandonment and the faint possibility that everything was not as it appeared. But the Dowager's words echoed again, stern and unyielding, "You will depart before dawn." The family had spoken. The house had chosen. She stepped inside, and the driver shut the door behind her with a decisive thud. The carriage jolted into motion, wheels crunching over gravel. The great manor receded slowly from view, its tall windows reflecting the growing light of morning. Eron watched it without blinking, without allowing a single tear to blur its outline. Just as the estate faded from sight, she lowered her gaze to the sealed envelope. Only then did she realize her hands were trembling. The carriage rattled steadily along the frozen road, the rhythmic clatter of wheels against stone filling the narrow compartment with a hollow, ceaseless pulse. Eron sat upright despite the sway, her gloved fingers resting lightly atop the sealed envelope. She had not yet opened it. Something inside her resisted the possibility of comfort, as if any tenderness contained within might prove more painful than the cold certainty that already surrounded her. Outside, the morning light had grown stronger, its pale gold tint struggling to warm the landscape. Bare branches stretched skyward like skeletal fingers, scratching at a sky of muted gray. She shifted her gaze from the window to the envelope again. She traced the crest with the edge of her thumb. Though the wax had been pressed firmly and cleanly, some part of her feared it held nothing more than a polite farewell, a confirmation of what the Dowager had already orchestrated. At last, her breath steadying, she slipped her finger beneath the seal and broke it. The wax cracked with a quiet snap, and she unfolded the page inside. The handwriting was unmistakably the Duke's, precise, elegant, yet imbued with an earnestness that revealed itself in the faintest pressure of ink. The letter was brief. He wrote of anticipation, of returning to Ashcombe with news he hoped she would find pleasing. He wrote that he longed for the moment they could speak freely, without the constraints of formalities or the watchful eyes of his family. There was nothing romantic in explicit terms, nothing bold, yet every phrase vibrated with sincerity. When she finished reading, Eron pressed the letter against her chest, feeling something shift quietly in her, like the flicker of a candle resisting a draught. But the letter had been withheld, and the family had acted in his absence. Whatever intentions he held had been buried beneath the Dowager's resolve. Eron folded the page carefully and tucked it beneath her cloak, allowing the warmth of it to linger. The road curved through the countryside, passing frost-coated hedges and distant fields blanketed in a thin veil of snow. As the carriage approached the first coaching inn, the horses slowed, their breath forming plumes in the cold air. The driver called out to a stable boy, arranging for fresh horses. Eron stepped down, her boots crunching lightly against the icy ground. The inn was modest, with sagging eaves and a door that creaked under the weight of passing travelers, but it offered a fire and a bench where she might rest while the horses were changed. Inside, a handful of patrons warmed themselves near the hearth. The scent of wood smoke mingled with the faint aroma of stewed broth. As Eron took a seat near the fire, she lowered her hood, feeling the heat seep slowly into her chilled cheeks. A woman seated across from her, a matron with worn gloves and a sympathetic expression, offered a gentle nod. "Long journey, my dear?" the woman asked, her voice carrying the cadence of rural England. "Long enough," Eron replied softly. The woman studied her with a perceptive eye. "Forgive me, but there's something familiar about you. Have you been to Bath before?" "I am bound for Bath now," Eron answered, choosing her words with care. The woman's brows lifted. "Then you must be—" She stopped herself, though not quickly enough to avoid revealing recognition. A flush crept up her neck. "Forgive me. There has been much talk on the road. Travelers repeat all manner of things." Eron felt her stomach tighten. "What sort of talk?" The woman hesitated, then spoke with unvarnished honesty. "Some say the Duke of Ashcombe has dismissed his new bride. Others say the marriage was mistaken from the start. There are even whispers that the young Duchess caused unrest at the manor." She leaned forward. "I should not repeat such things. Rumors have a way of growing uglier as they travel." Though the words cut deeply, Eron forced a measured breath. She understood that silence would protect her dignity better than any protest. "People often speak with certainty about matters they do not understand," she replied. It was the most she could manage without unraveling. The woman's expression softened. "I hope, whatever the truth may be, that you find peace where you are headed." Eron inclined her head in gratitude. Peace felt distant, but she appreciated the kindness. After a short rest, she stepped back outside. The fresh horses were already harnessed, steaming lightly in the crisp air. As she approached the carriage, she caught sight of a small group of travelers gathered by the stables, conversing in low tones. One of them, noticing her, hurriedly nudged the others, and they fell into murmured speculation. She knew what they saw, a young woman traveling alone, her features too refined for a governess, yet her attire too modest for a wealthy wife. It was not difficult for them to fill the gaps with hearsay. She climbed into the carriage, the driver closed the door, and soon the inn faded behind them. The letter from the Duke weighed gently against her side, reminding her of the world she had just left, of the man whose intentions had been obscured by the machinations of others. She wondered what he might have said had he been given the opportunity. Would he have fought for her? Or would he have accepted the family's decision out of duty and pragmatism? The answer eluded her, and the uncertainty gnawed at the edges of her composure. Hours passed as the carriage traversed the winding countryside. The sun reached its zenith and then drifted lower, casting long shadows across the road. Eron felt her weariness deepen. Every jolt of the wheels reminded her that she was being carried away from what might have been a life, unfinished, unclaimed, barely begun. She closed her eyes, allowing the rhythm of travel to steady her thoughts. She was startled from her reverie when the carriage abruptly slowed again. Voices rose outside, urgent, uncertain. Before she could gather her bearings, the door swung open. The driver appeared, eyes wide. "Begging your pardon, my lady," he stammered, "but someone is approaching. A rider. He's coming fast." Eron's heart thudded once, sharply. "A rider?" The driver nodded. Hard to say his intent, but he seems determined. She leaned slightly forward, peering past the driver into the pale afternoon light. In the distance, through a veil of mist that had begun to gather over the fields, She glimpsed the silhouette of a horse and rider moving with startling speed. The figure cut through the fog like an apparition, cloak billowing, posture resolute, each hoofbeat echoing across the frozen earth. She felt the air leave her lungs. The driver turned to her. "Shall I bid the horses on, my lady?" Eron hesitated. Her thoughts spun. Fear, hope, disbelief all knotted tightly together. The letter at her side seemed to pulse with meaning. At last, she found her voice. "No," she said quietly. "We shall wait." The rider drew nearer, the outline sharpening. The driver glanced nervously between them, sensing something unspoken. Eron sat very still, her hands folded, her breath suspended as though the entire moment rested upon its edge. As the figure closed the final distance, the truth became undeniable. The horse slowed, its breath gusting into the winter air, and the rider brought it to a halt before the carriage. Eron's pulse quickened. Her entire world seemed to balance upon the space of a single heartbeat. The Duke had found her. The Duke dismounted before the carriage door fully opened, his boots striking the frozen ground with a force that betrayed the urgency of his ride. His cloak billowed behind him, whipped by the wind, and his breath came in visible plumes as though each exhale carried both exhaustion and resolve. Eron remained seated, her hands clasped tightly, her spine rigid with disbelief. She had imagined many possibilities for the day, but the sight of her husband striding toward her, mud-splattered, wind-burned, and unmistakably determined, had never dared form itself in her mind. "Eron," he said, his voice raw from the cold and the hours spent calling her name along the road. He stopped at the carriage's threshold, one gloved hand gripping the frame. "Please, step down. I beg you." The plea, quiet yet unwavering, left her momentarily frozen. She studied him with cautious eyes. The Duke she remembered from Ashcombe had carried himself with polite restraint, a man shaped by upbringing and duty. The man before her now looked carved from conviction. Slowly, she accepted the driver's offered hand and descended from the carriage. Her boots touched the frost-hardened earth with deliberate grace. The Duke's gaze swept over her, not with ownership, but with relief so profound it softened the stern lines of his face. "You left without a word," he said, though there was no accusation in his tone, only grief, only confusion. "I was asked to leave," Eron replied, maintaining the formality that steadied her voice. "Before dawn. By your family." He closed his eyes briefly, as if the statement were a physical blow. When he opened them again, intensity shone through. "You should never have been sent away. I did not permit it. I was not informed. He halted, struggling to gather his thoughts. "I returned to Ashcombe this morning to share news with you, only to find your room empty and the household in chaos." Eron's fingers tightened around the folded letter concealed beneath her cloak. "So you did not ask for the annulment?" she asked, the question trembling between them like a fragile thread. "Annulment?" His voice sharpened with incredulity. "Never. Not once. I told them from the beginning that our marriage was my choice, mine, not theirs to alter or negotiate." He took a slow step closer, lowering his voice. "Did you truly believe I would cast you aside after 7 days?" She wanted to insist that she had not believed it, not truly, but the memory of the Dowager's domineering gaze and the brother's harsh whispers filled her mind. "Your absence," she murmured, "was presented as agreement." "You must trust my intentions more than their maneuvering," he said with gentle urgency. "My family has long mistaken my patience for acquiescence." She held his gaze. "Then what were your intentions? You left so soon after the wedding. I knew nothing of your thoughts." He reached into the inner pocket of his cloak and withdrew a second letter. The paper was crumpled, the seal broken, evidence of a search made in haste. "This," he said, offering it to her, "is the letter I left on my desk the night I was summoned. I asked the steward to deliver it to you in the morning. It appears it never reached your hands." Eron accepted the page, though she did not unfold it. She understood without reading that the contents mattered less than the meaning behind the gesture. "My letter was withheld as well," she said. "I received it only as I was leaving." He exhaled slowly. "Then we have both been wronged." The wind swept around them, carrying loose strands of her hair across her cheek. The Duke lifted a hand, hesitant, almost reverent, and brushed the strands back. The touch was brief, restrained by propriety and circumstance, yet it sent a warmth through her that defied the winter air. "You left in pain," he said softly. "I should have been there to shield you from it." Eron felt something within her loosen, something she had been clutching tightly for days. "I did not expect protection," she answered. "Merely understanding. A word, a sign, something to tell me I was not alone in that house." "You were never alone," he said. "You are, if you will allow it, my partner in all things. I cannot undo what my family has done, but I can ensure it never happens again." His sincerity threatened to undo the composure she fought to maintain. She lowered her gaze for a moment, gathering her thoughts. "What happens now?" she asked. "If I return, the Dowager will oppose it. She believes I am unworthy." "My mother's opinions," he said firmly, "are no longer the measure by which I shape my life." He paused, then added more quietly, "Nor will they dictate my marriage." Eron looked up, surprised to see a flicker of vulnerability in his expression. The Duke was a man accustomed to leadership, yet with her he seemed willing to set aside every shield ingrained by upbringing. "I rode after you," he continued, "because the moment I learned you had been cast out, I realized how profoundly I needed you to stay. These past 7 days, though brief, were the first time in years that I felt as though my life had begun to align with what I wished it to be, rather than what others demanded." Eron felt the words ripple through her like a quiet revelation. She had not expected confession. She had not expected earnestness. She had certainly not expected him to speak with the weight of a man bearing truth rather than duty. "I do not ask you to forgive my family," he said. "Only to believe that I stand with you, not with them. If you wish it, I will return you to Bath myself. I will not compel you to come back to Ashcombe." The choice settled heavily in her mind. To return meant confronting hostility. To continue onward meant forfeiting something that might, if carefully nurtured, become a life of companionship rather than exile. She looked at him, really looked, at the man who had ridden through cold and mist to reach her, who had cast aside dignity in the eyes of society to catch her carriage before it disappeared over the horizon. His eyes held neither command nor desperation, only hope, softened by humility. "Your intentions," she said quietly, "have become clearer to me today than in all the days before." He extended his hand, not as a duke commanding his duchess, but as a man offering partnership. "Then come home with me. Let us confront whatever awaits, together." Eron inhaled deeply. The road behind her was filled with uncertainty, and the road ahead held challenges she could not yet name. But somewhere within her, a fragile trust began to take root. She placed her hand in his. The warmth of his grasp steadied her. "I will return," she said. Relief washed across his features, subtle yet unmistakable. He guided her toward his horse, but she paused to glance back at the carriage that had carried her away from Ashcombe. It stood silent now, its purpose fulfilled. When she turned again, the Duke lifted her gently into the saddle before mounting behind her. His arms settled around her, not possessive, but protective. The horse shifted beneath them, awaiting direction. As they began the journey back, the fading light caught on the frost, and the world seemed momentarily softened. Yet beneath the calm, an undercurrent of anticipation stirred. The Dowager would not welcome this return. But Eron no longer traveled alone. The return to Ashcombe was marked by a silence laden not with discomfort but with anticipation. Eron felt the Duke's steady presence behind her as the horse carried them through the dimming afternoon. The rhythm of its hooves soothed her frayed nerves, gradually replacing anxiety with a cautious sense of direction. The estate's distant silhouette emerged through scattered mists, its familiar turrets rising like sentinels against the sky. She had left those halls as a dismissed outsider. Now she approached as a woman newly aware of her husband's resolve, and of her own quiet strength. As they entered the grounds, servants emerged tentatively from the shadows of the stable yard, their faces a melange of curiosity and apprehension. None dared speak. Eron dismounted with the Duke's assistance, and together they crossed the gravel toward the manor's broad, frost-glazed steps. The heavy front doors opened before them, revealing the dim grandeur within. A footman froze at the sight of Eron, his expression flickering from alarm to uncertainty, but the Duke gave a slight nod that required no words. Authority, when properly wielded, needed no volume. Inside the great hall, the fire still burned from the night before, though its flames had dwindled to glowing embers. The Dowager Duchess stood at the far end, draped in dark velvet, her posture rigid as though carved from stone. The Duke's brothers flanked her, their expressions thinly veiled mixtures of indignation and apprehension. Eron kept her chin lifted, not out of defiance but clarity. Whatever happened next would not be endured in silence. The Duke stepped forward first. "Mother," he said, voice even but edged with unmistakable conviction, "Lady Eron has returned. She returns as my wife, and as the rightful Duchess of Ashcombe." A ripple of tension passed through the hall. The Dowager folded her hands, her gaze landing upon Eron with piercing scrutiny. "I had hoped," she replied with icy precision, "that reason would prevail before this unfortunate spectacle came to pass." The Duke's jaw tightened. "Reason did not guide your actions. Deceit did. You dismissed my wife without informing me. You withheld correspondence meant for her and for me. Your conduct jeopardized not only our marriage, but this family's integrity." Her eyes narrowed. "You forget yourself." "No," he countered. "I remember myself precisely. And I remember the vows I made." The Dowager looked as though she intended to speak again, but the Duke continued, cutting through her poised objections. "Eron will not be cast aside," he said. "She will not be hidden or humiliated. I chose her, and I choose her still. Any dissent from this household does not hold the authority to overturn the decision of its Duke." Eron felt a subtle warmth bloom in her chest, not from the fire but from the certainty in his words. She had not expected such a public declaration, not after a week of being overshadowed by tradition and hierarchy. Yet there he stood, unwavering, resolute, fully claiming the place beside her that marriage had promised. One of the brothers, the elder and more outspoken, stepped forward. "You act hastily. The Duchess's lack of pedigree is of no consequence to you," the Duke interrupted. "Nor will her worth ever be measured by lineage in this house." His voice reverberated through the hall, its echo settling like a final decree. The Dowager inhaled sharply, and for a moment it seemed she might unleash a torrent of rebuttal. But as she surveyed her son's unwavering expression and Eron's composed stance beside him, something in her posture shifted, a minute faltering, as though she recognized the futility of attempting to bend a will that had finally asserted itself. "If this remains your intention," she said quietly, "then the consequences are yours to bear." "They are ours to bear," the Duke corrected, turning slightly toward Eron. "Together." The Dowager's gaze flicked between them, and though her expression remained severe, she inclined her head in a gesture that was not acceptance, but acknowledgment. A first, grudging surrender. The tension in the hall eased only subtly, like a storm receding but still rumbling at the horizon. Eron released a breath she had not realized she'd been holding. She met the Duke's gaze, and the faint softening around his eyes assured her that he felt the weight of the moment as deeply as she did. A few hours later the manor was lit for the evening, the glow of candles casting warm pools of light along the corridors. Eron found herself walking with the Duke toward the conservatory, drawn by the faint scent of winter roses drifting through the air. The moment they entered, she paused, touched by the quiet beauty of the space. The glass walls were etched with frost, and the last traces of sunlight refracted through them in pale hues. Rows of dormant plants lined the room, but several blossoms, tended carefully by the Duke himself, stood in gentle defiance of the season. He stopped beside her, his voice low. "I feared I might never walk with you here." She turned to him. "And I feared I would never return." He reached for her hand, this time without hesitation. His touch was warm, steady, almost grounding. "Your leaving showed me how deeply I value what we have only begun to understand. I should have protected you sooner, spoken more plainly, made my intentions known. My silence caused you pain." She shook her head. "I knew too little of your circumstances. I allowed others to shape my understanding of what you felt. Perhaps I feared to hope too strongly." He brushed his thumb along the back of her hand, a gesture tender and unguarded. "Hope," he said softly, "is what we must hold to now. Not the hope others define for us, but the one we create ourselves." In the conservatory's quiet twilight, surrounded by the faint scent of roses, Eron sensed the delicate but resolute shift of something beginning rather than ending. The Duke's expression held no trace of doubt, only earnest promise. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "From this night onward, you are not to walk toward dawn alone. Whatever awaits us, we face it side by side." The words settled into her like a vow renewed. She found herself leaning toward him, not out of duty or obligation, but out of the newfound certainty that their future, though uncertain in shape, could be built upon trust rather than fear. Outside, the wind stirred softly, rustling the branches beyond the glass. The manor, once a place of dread and displacement, now felt, for the first time, capable of becoming a home. The Duke reached up and gently lifted her chin, his gaze searching hers with quiet depth. She answered with a faint, grateful smile. It was enough. There would be challenges ahead. The Dowager's resistance would not vanish, nor would society's sharp tongue fall silent overnight. But Eron no longer stood isolated before that weight. And the Duke, who had once seemed distant behind layers of duty, now stood wholly at her side. As the candles flickered and their joined hands warmed between them, the conservatory's frost-kissed silence embraced the moment with quiet promise. Their story, fragile, unsteady, but no longer threatened, had only just begun.